Hello, welcome to Big Bang Radio Spotlights. This is a show where we talk to independent artists from all around the world all about their music and their process for making it. I'm your host, Isaac Anderson, and today I get to sit down with Eric Anderson from the musical project Cataldo. Without any further ado, here's the interview. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. I want to start at the beginning of your musical journey, just like we do with all the other artists that we talk to on the show. So the first question I want to ask you is, what is your earliest musical memory?
When I was really young, my uncle, who's an arranger for Hall Leonard, which is a sheet music company, he lived in Spokane, Washington, not far away from where I grew up in Moscow, Idaho. And we had a family piano, and he would come down to visit, and he could just play kind of any song that you named. And we had I was probably, 5, 6. We had little Disney songbooks, and we would play through those, and we would sing. And I was like, this is cool. I like this. So yeah, old Uncle Tom, he definitely exposed us to what it was like to play with a really good musician. And that got me hooked when I was really young.
Sounds like you've been playing music for quite some time and had a general love and an interest for music. But do you remember the first time that you got in front of an audience and played music that you created yourself and wrote?
I grew up in Moscow, Idaho, and there's just one high school in town, Moscow High School, and every year they have this thing called Arts Fest. What it was they would shut down classes for 3 or 4 days. And I had done lots of singing before in a group context, so like choir and things like that. But I hadn't, played guitar and, sung my own songs in front of anybody. And got a very warm reception to that. And I did that those 3 years of high school. And it's funny, without that, I'm sure I would have performed music. Eventually, I was really interested in that. But it got me hooked early on. I'm not sure when I would have really had a venue for that. It was a cool thing that the school did because I think the theory was, if you're interested in athletics or debate or, math Olympian or whatever, you get a chance to do that in front of people. But if you do something like music, or they would set up a gallery for painters, you don't really get a chance to show your peers that. And so, yeah, Arts Fest at Moscow High School was very, very impactful for sure.
You've been putting music out under the name Cataldo for quite a bit, but just in your mind and experience, when was Cataldo actually born?
Well, the first record came out in 2005, and that was when I was 18. When I had made that record, I was not performing under that name. My full name's Eric Anderson, and I sort of thought that was a boring name. And there was another folk singer in the 70s who's also named Eric Anderson, although he's S.E. And so I said to myself, well, maybe I'll try a moniker or a band name that I can sort of do whatever I want under that umbrella. And it's served me just fine in the intervening almost 20 years. It's crazy. So that's where the band name got started, where it came from, and when I started using it.
Catch my breath, I think it'd be just fine. You could die waiting for an omen, Valentine. I don't believe in a good moment at the wrong time.
Something interesting I found about your music is how specific your lyricism is and how it sits in a world of its own. There's so many songs that I've heard of you that really made me fall in love with your songwriting that just showed me that it was just something that was super unique and had a really good feel to it. And I'm just curious, when you go about writing your music, do you try to write lyrics first and then put music to it, or does the music come first and then the lyrics?
Usually for me, the music comes first, but those two things are really very married together for me. And the reason being, if you study like poetry, there's a theory of sort of the meter of language. It's called scansion. And basically all words in English, you can break them down into hard beats and soft beats. For me, it's kind of about saying something that I haven't said before, or that I haven't heard a song do before. Early on, you're just trying to make something that sounds good at all. You don't need to worry about being very original or retreading old stuff that you've done before. But at this point, I'm just kind of trying to write something that feels fresh to me, either something that I haven't explored in my music before, or something that I haven't heard other people say in quite that way. So, yeah.
Seattle is a hotbed for the kind of music that you make. Obviously, it has a lot of musical history, has a lot of great bands coming from there, and just something about that environment, I think, is really conducive to making the kind of music that you make. But just from somebody that lives there and from somebody that makes music there especially, how has that environment shaped your sound? And also, kind of going on that, how have you seen the scene change since Cataldo started to now?
It's funny, I've of course entertained the idea of living in other places and have lots of friends and all over the country really, despite having done the amount of touring that we've done. But certainly New York, Los Angeles, Nashville, the kind of large music hubs. And there's a different culture here. LA, people are sizing you up a lot, like, what can we do for each other? Or I guess the more negative way to frame that is, how can you help me and help me get ahead in the world? And Seattle is just very allergic to that attitude. There's sort of this idea that you shouldn't want to be successful or famous, at least, and that we try to be unimpressed by people who are. So if you see Ed Vedder at the grocery store, you're not gonna bug him. There's a thing about Seattle where we all really root for each other. And even people who maybe you'd be surprised at that because of the genre of music they play or whatever. But when Macklemore was on the Super Bowl halftime show or whatever, Seattle stoked. The other thing that's interesting is people usually stick around. Folks, when they become successful, plenty of them move away or move to a place that's more conducive to doing the amount of travel and creative work that they do. So plenty of folks have left town, but lots of them don't. And that, I think, is conducive to a lot of pride in where we're from. If I were graduating from college or had knocked around, I was between 18 and 22, and I was saying to myself, well, I could pay this amount of rent and live in Los Angeles, or I could pay this amount of rent and live in Seattle. I'm not sure I'd move to Seattle. Do you know what I mean? It's cheap places to live have often, thriving music communities. And so I worry about that a little bit, that people just aren't going to want to end up here because it's too expensive. And I'm not sure how or if that will change, barring major economic collapse with the employers here like Amazon and other tech companies that are very high paying. And listen, I'm not bent out of shape at any specific person, but the fact is that we've just had a ton of people move here, and we haven't built housing to keep pace with that. And so the rents have, when I moved here in 2008, I was paying, I think, $500, $600 a month to live in a house in Ballard. And now that same place would be about double that price, probably. So, it's just, it's a challenging issue here for sure.
You just put out a new album recently, too. It was called Dumber and Older. It's on streaming platforms right now. It's super awesome. And I was curious, what was the process of making that light for you, and what does this record mean to you?
I got started on it in January 2020, and obviously the pandemic hadn't started yet. And the last couple of records, I'd done a considerable amount of work with this engineer and producer named Andy Park. We were saying to ourselves, let's just do something kind of chill and mostly work at home. And so we had set up a file sharing protocol, and we're working out of his home studio, my home studio, and bouncing stuff back and forth. I brought him into the process a lot earlier than usual, where songs were fully baked, and was getting his input about that. And then the pandemic hit, and I got laid off from my job. I was working for an ice cream company doing operations stuff. And we were sort of like set up for it in a funny way. We of course didn't know this was coming, but we had home recording situations all set up. And then I would never say the pandemic was a good thing. It wasn't. But every touring musician was home. Like every studio musician had their session canceled. And if they didn't have a home recording set up, they got one 5 minutes after the pandemic started, because everyone was just, bored and sitting at home. And so when you look at the personnel on this, it's actually like an extremely collaborative record, even though I think we only did like maybe 2 or 3 days of basic tracking with musicians in a room together. We rented out a big studio in town called Studio X. It's built in an old church, and the control room is on a different floor than the live room. And, it's a space that can hold like 200 people. And so we could spread out musicians. We all wore masks, and we did a lot of drum and bass in those couple days. Yeah, we kind of shaped the songs over about a year, and had a chance to just get everybody we wanted on them. And it's funny, like there's sort of prescient things about the tunes that like there's a song on the record called Out of Reach that has a reference to something being locally dystopian. And I wrote that long before the pandemic, and it just sort of became apropos. And so, yeah. And let's see, I think we wrapped it up in 2021 at some point, and then I think it just came out this year. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, the record's out right now. It's super awesome. And if people want to keep up with Cataldo, how can they find you guys online?
We're pretty easy to Google. It's Cataldo, and the website's Cataldo Music, and that links to all the stuff. We're on Spotify, Instagram, and all the social media things. If you want to listen to me mouth off about stuff that isn't very music related, you can find me on Twitter. And then send me an email if you want to. My email's on my website.
Wonderful. Well, Eric, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I've been a fan for such a long time. But before you go, I have one more question. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a Big Bang Radio spotlight before, but I'm a musician, but I also love film. And I believe those two worlds aren't too far away from each other, and musicians like us just have a soft spot for that. So, Eric, before you go, what is your favorite movie?
I can't think of my favorite one, but it's funny, this week I was watching a movie with my wife, and she just doesn't have major movie stamina. It doesn't sound like fun to her to watch a 3-hour movie after work or whatever, which there's nothing wrong with, of course. But I really wanted to show her that movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino movie that came out in 2019. And so we broke it up into 3 segments. We watched 50 minutes of it over 3 nights. And so we had a weird sort of triple feature over 3 nights of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which has a very dramatic ending that was worth the price of admission. So that was fun.
Thanks to Eric for sitting down with us and talking all about Cataldo's music. If you guys want to see more interviews just like this, you can find us online at Studio 67 NCC. Thank you all for watching. I'm Isaac Anderson, and until next time, stay lovely.